Hi, it's Mitesh here. Thanks for joining me for part 2 on securing data in Microsoft Azure. In this one, we'll be looking at the private link demo, so I'll show you how that works and what it actually looks like. So in this demo, we're mostly focusing on the green area. How do we control traffic right at the endpoint of our objects that we're trying to protect? The demo will also show you connecting with a lower access user account rather than an administrative account using role-based access and Azure AD to connect to the SQL box. And in the next session, we'll look at the data masking and auditing. So we'll take a quick look at how we access it over the internet while it's open up and what the risks are of granted SQL admins to your servers. And then we'll skip to the private IP access using private endpoint. So before I show you the environment, I'll just quickly go over it. So we're going to connect to the machines using the Bastion host, which gives me HTTP access into my machines because I'm connecting from my home network. So it's not connected via VPN or express route. But the simulation will consist of a central US location where the customer's network might be. And that's actually connected via VNet peering to a private network in Azure in East US. In real life, that would be a VPN connection or an express route connection. That allows us to create a private endpoint inside our cloud side of the network, and that then gets given an internal IP address. That IP address is then granted access to our SQL instance, and we get to it by using a private DNS zone, which is listed here using this name. I'll also show you how this DNS works on the other side of the network as well. So I've switched over to our environment, and we can see the customer network on the left and our private cloud network on the right. So these are all the objects that we will be interacting with. So let's start by looking at our SQL box. So let's look at the access to that box at the moment. So if we look at firewalls, there is no allow all Azure services switched on. There's no client IP addresses, so nobody can come over the internet as it is at the moment. And we don't have anything down here for the service endpoints. Okay. What we do have is a private endpoint object allowed access. Okay, so a private endpoint object, private endpoint 1. So let's have a look at that. This is an object that's created inside our front end subnet here, and it's associated to that network card. So if we click on the network card itself, we can then view that network card's IP address. So basically, we've got a private endpoint object that we interact with that then uses this IP address on this NIC, which is associated to our private network here. Okay, and then that will then translate the traffic into the SQL backend without using a public endpoint. We also have, as we mentioned, a DNS private zone here called privatelink.database.windows.net. If we look inside there, we'll see a record for a private SQL server 1. So that's the record that we create. We give the IP address of the private endpoint NIC, as we see 10.0.0.4. We can also see that the DNS zone here is actually added to our network here. So we've added it to our cloud side network. We've also added it here, in this case, to our on-prem network as well, or our simulation of our on-prem network. So if we add a network through here, then items inside that network will be able to resolve the names. Without that, we can use a custom DNS or even a host record for testing if you want. One thing to note is that if you've got another private zone like this one with the same name somewhere else, you can't attach that to the same network. So each network can have a private zone added, but not with the same zone name. So let's look at trying to connect to this SQL server from my own computer over the internet. I'm going to use an administrative account. So let's say I've created a SQL box and granted somebody an owner of that box. So then they could use their own Azure AD credentials to go in and connect to that box. So I'll show you how that looks. Okay, that's not allowed me in. But what I could do, I could go into the portal with this account and go straight into here. So say if I was a user that's been given owner access, I can go straight into the firewalls, add client IP, so that'll add my own IP into it, click save. And the next time I tried it, it'll go straight in. So that means I could have opened that firewall up in a public network, in a cafe, anywhere, or a hotel, and then that will just stay there now unless somebody goes in and tidies it up. So that's one of the risks of granting owner or SQL admin access. We'll also check the public IP that I'm coming in from, so we'll be able to see that we're connecting over the internet. So if I just run this query here, and you can see that's my internet IP address there. So we'll connect to our environment here in the cloud. So we'll connect to this one first via the Bastion, and then we'll connect to our on-prem machine just to show you how that looks. So first we'll click on there. If we click connect, we can see this machine's only got an internal IP, but there's no public access to RDP on this machine. So if we use the Bastion, we'll be able to get in via HTTPS using the portal, which is again is restricted by user permissions and who can see that service. What this will do is open up a new tab and give us access to our VM. Okay, so from there we can click on our SQL box from here, for example, and this will take us into a private link session. But we'll go a step further though. We'll connect to our on-prem network, which is here. So we're going over the VPN now, or VNet peer in this case, but this is to simulate our VPN connection. Okay, we'll connect to our database here using our restricted account here. So we've just got a DB reader account, and it's only got access to a specific database as well, so we don't have server level access anymore. And then click on connection properties, and we've got to specify our database because we don't have server level access. We've got to actually specify the database, so it is a lot more restrictive, this one. So we'll go in there and we can see we've connected to our box that way. And just to double check how we're going in, we can see we've got no internet endpoints open on our SQL box anymore. Okay, so there's no allow all, there's no internet IPs, and there's no virtual networks. And we can prove that if we use an admin connection just to check the IP. So if we use my login here, make sure I'm in the user database, just run this one here. I can see this is our internal IP address, so we're going via the private endpoint here. So if we close that, so we needed this connection just to show you that. So if we just close that one, go back to our restricted user here, and let's open that same script with the restricted user. So he can actually, he's got read access to a database at the moment. Okay, and he can see all the access to all the fields. So what we're going to do in the next video is to hide some of this data as well. So this user, so the restricted users can't see personally identifiable information, for example. Okay. What we can also do is check our network route into the private link SQL Server. So if we just double click on this NS lookup, we do an NS lookup there, and it shows you our private zone here, and that maps to the IP address that we saw, 10.0.0.4, and that's how we've managed to get access to it. And we've also added that DNS zone to this network. Okay, if we didn't do that, we could add a host record to resolve that as well. That also works. So this shows how we connect to this VM using a Bastion host, how then we get across the VPN to our private endpoint, and then from our private endpoint we get to our backend SQL Server, all using a restricted account. So the next step might be, okay, so how do we restrict access to that private endpoint? So in your source networks, the way you do that is by applying NSGs or firewall rules to outbound access. So this could be an on-prem firewall here, or a peered network, for example, and we'd have rules in here to say, okay, only allow this guy access, but not these other guys up here. And we'll quickly show you that as well. So we could have a network, all of our on-prem VMs here. The way we control access outbound to our private endpoints, and in this case we're using NSGs because it's in Azure, but the same principle would apply to your own on-prem firewall. So if we look at the outbound rules here, we can see we have a rule here to allow 1433, so to the SQL port, from that machine specifically at the moment to our destination private endpoint here. And that's how we can connect to that machine. So if I go into here and change that to a different machine or even a range, so our machine has no longer got access to it, so we're kind of simulating accessing from a completely different machine now. Okay, so our IP address is still 10.4, that where we're connecting from, but that no longer has access. So we can do that. So we're using our restricted account here again, connected to the database level, click connect now. And this came back and says, no, we can't connect to that endpoint. So that's kind of how we restrict the access to the private endpoints as well. So you do have a lot of control over using this method. So now we can see how we can restrict access from the source networks as well. So now we have a truly private connection here. So we can manage access from our subnets in Azure and also from our on-prem networks using firewalls or NSGs. So just a quick summary. So if you're using VNet peering, make sure there's at least one VM in the peered network for it to be supported. Okay, for the DNS zones, which I showed you there, where we create your private zone, you could add a host file or a custom DNS server to resolve the private link zones. And again, you can't attach two zones with the same name to the VNet if it already has one. Okay. Another thing if you're programmatically creating your subnets, ensure you disable the private endpoint network policies attribute, because that is disabled by default if you do it via the portal or if you're doing it via script, because NSGs don't actually apply to private endpoints as well, so we can't have that setting enabled on the subnet. Okay, and we used outbound firewall rules to control access from source VMs to our private networks, and again that could be your on-prem firewalls as well. In the next one, we'll look at how we secure the data that's within the database. So hope you'll join me then. And I'd just like to say thank you again for watching this part. If you'd like to subscribe, brilliant. Thank you very much.